Next for immigration reform, and does it actually have any chance of getting anywhere? Joining us now with reaction, Florida Senator Marco Rubio. Senator,
thank you.
Everybody, good to see you. How are you?
Thank you.
Well, not an easy, almost 900 pages long. Why don't you tell us about the bill?
Let me begin, Sean. Thank you for doing this program and for everyone that's here. It's such a critical issue. Let's begin by just answering why we're even doing this. And as a Republican, I can tell you that this issue is going to come up in the Senate with or without me. In essence, the Democrats made very clear they were going to bring an immigration bill to the floor. And so we were going to have a position or an alternative or some sort of view on it and how to fix it. Let me secondarily say that this is an issue that's hurting America as it's currently structured. But what I begin by telling everybody that will listen is that even if we didn't have a single illegal immigrant in the United States, even if we didn't have one, we would still have to do immigration reform because our legal immigration system, the one we have now to legally immigrate here, it's broken. For example, the one we have now is largely based on whether you have a relative living in the U.S. If you have a relative that lives in the U.S., it's easier for you to immigrate than if you have a special skill or talent or something to offer to our economy. We need to change that. We also understand that immigration isn't just about people that are coming here to work. It's about people that are coming here to visit. I mean, this is the most powerful country in the world, the largest economy in the world. We do business from people all over the world. They come here as tourists. They come here as businessmen. They come here as investors. They live here 6 months and go back to Canada or somewhere else the other 6 months of the year. All of that is immigration. And the process by which all of that happens is bureaucratic, it's broken, it's complicated, and certain industries in particular, like agriculture, do not have a reliable system to bring guest workers in who are seasonally here. And it's actually a contributor to illegal immigration. So that's the first part of it, and that's the part that doesn't get a lot of attention because it's not as controversial. The second part is we have immigration laws that are not being enforced, largely because we don't have the full mechanisms in place to enforce it. Now, obviously, there is gun running at the border. There is human trafficking at the border. There are other things that are happening. But the magnet that's one of the strongest magnets that's bringing people here illegally is jobs. We do not have a reliable national electronic verification system that employers can use to verify that the people they're hiring are 100% legally here. We need to create one, and we need to enforce it so that if you don't E-verify, and if you don't do it, you will have to pay very stiff penalties and fines, in essence, strongly discourage companies from doing that. We don't do a very good job of tracking visitors. 40% are illegal immigrants in the United States entered legally. They didn't jump a fence or cross the border. They came in on a tourist visa or some other temporary visa. It expires, and they stayed. We don't know who they are because we only track you when you come in. We don't register you when you go out. That needs to be fixed. And the bill does those two things. That's why you're not hearing a lot about those two things. The last point is the hardest one, and that's the border. And it doesn't help when you have the administration and the person in charge in the administration of these issues, Janet Napolitano, appearing before Congress and saying the border's already secure. That undermines the effort. The reality of it is there have been improvements in certain sectors of the border, but it is not strong enough to withstand what could come our way when the economy gets better, when a bill like this passes. We have to have improvements at the border that are significant because none of these other things work if we are setting ourselves up for another wave of illegal immigration that we can't stop.
Let me ask you, look, the number one reason as a conservative I've always wanted the border secure is for national security reasons. I've been down there, and we'll talk about it later, in 6, 7 different areas of the border. It's not secure, but they can secure it. That's one of the things I learned. But I'm afraid somebody coming over into this country that wants to commit an act of terror. Now, you mentioned earlier we have laws on the books now.
Yes.
Those laws are not enforced. And then it raises the question of confidence.
Right.
If we're not going to enforce the law now, and Arizona passes a law with the same language as the federal law, and then they're beaten up for doing what they wouldn't do nationally, right, why would people have the confidence that this is going to work this time?
And that's the fundamental problem, and that is that because of the lack of trust, and let's be clear, it isn't just Democrats. The Republican administrations failed to do this, too. I mean, you don't get to 11 million people in this country illegally overnight. I mean, this took a couple of administrations or more for this problem to build up to the level that it has. But let me describe to you, some of our laws are not enforced because we don't have the mechanisms to enforce. For example, it's illegal to hire an illegal alien to work in the United States. But businesses do not have a reliable way to determine if the person they're hiring is truly that person. They just show you a Social Security card. You have nothing to compare it to. Even if you ran them through E-Verify, it could be you could get a false negative on there. The same thing with the people that should be deported because they've overstayed their visas. We don't know who they are. We track people when they come in, but we virtually don't track anyone when they leave. And the last point is the border security, which gets a lot of attention. You are right. The border is not just about immigration. It's about national security. It's about sovereignty. A sovereign country should be able to control its borders. I believe the nation that landed a man on the moon multiple times can secure its border. The question is, the problem is that people do not trust this administration and the federal government in general to do the law. So it's pretty straightforward, and I tell this to people all the time. If we can figure out a way to write a bill that ensures that the border will be secured, I believe immigration reform will happen. If we cannot do that or fail to do that, I do not believe immigration reform can or should happen. And so really, this issue at the end of the day is about getting that part of it right.
When we come back, we'll find out where we are in the process right now. We'll continue plenty more ahead with Senator Marco Rubio. We'll also ask him tonight about Benghazi and the IRS. And in just a few minutes, our panel of experts, they're going to join the discussion as this special audience edition of Hannity continues. To the special edition of Hannity, and we're joined tonight by Senator Marco Rubio and a special panel of experts to talk about the always controversial topic of immigration reform. But first, some of the conservatives in the country on their side of the aisle say that they support the idea of immigration reform but are worried about the details. Here, for example, is Senator Rand Paul.
It says, well, you have to have a plan to build a fence, but you don't have to build a fence. And if you don't have a plan to build the fence, then you get a commission. I don't know what happens if the commission doesn't do anything. That's the story of Washington around here. To me, it's a little bit like Obamacare. And I hate to bring that up, but 1,800 references to the secretary shall at a later date decide things. We don't write bills around here. We should write the bill. We should write the plan. We should do these things to secure the border, whether it be fence, entry, exit. We should write it, not delegate it, because what's going to happen in 5 years if they don't do their job, it may not even be them, it may be somebody else who doesn't do their job in 5 years, and the border's not secure, we will be blamed for the next 10 million people who come here illegally.
And we continue with Florida Senator Marco Rubio. I think that Senator Paul has a point here. I always think when it comes to spending cuts and increases, you always get the tax increase, you never get the spending cut.
Right.
Here we're going to find a path to a green card and then maybe citizenship, but when are we going to get the border secure for sure?
Well, a couple things, and his point generally is well taken. There's a couple points that need to be cleared up. Number one, it doesn't just say you can come up with a plan but not do it. You have to substantially complete that plan. You have a fence plan, it has to be substantially completed. You have a border plan, it has to be substantially completed. E-Verify must be fully completed. I mean, no substantial, it has to be done. All of the, and the entry-exit system has to be completely done before a single green card is given out. Here's the fundamental problem, though. What people are saying is, we don't trust the Department of Homeland Security to come up with a good border plan. We don't trust the Department of Homeland Security to come up with a good fencing plan. And so maybe the alternative is to have the Congress do that. The point is that needs to happen. That is the linchpin of whether this will work or not.
Well, okay, so that has been the biggest area of criticism. Are you working on changing that aspect of it?
Absolutely. What I've told people all the time, and that's why we have a committee process. Yeah. You know, in the past, certainly before I got to the Senate, what would happen is people would go to a room, they'd come up with a bill, they'd draw it up, and then it was a take it or leave it proposition. I'm not sure that's the way this is supposed to work. I think the way this works is you have a group of people, or maybe an individual senator or congressman, write up a bill as a starting point, but then you have 92 other colleagues in the case of this issue that have their own ideas, that come from their own experience and have their own ways that they want to see this improved. And so we're in the process of doing that. It's in the committee now, the Judiciary Committee, where it's going to have many more days of hearings, and then it's got to go to the floor process, not to mention the House.
Wouldn't you have a better, easier time selling this, especially to conservatives that are concerned about a second, third, fourth wave of illegal immigrants coming to the country, if you just secure the border first? Doesn't the law now mandate that?
Yeah, the fundamental problem is the law does mandate that we secure our border. The fundamental problem we have with that, however, is that we have 11.5 to 11 million people in this country right now illegally, most of whom we don't know who they are, most of whom are not paying taxes or are paying taxes sporadically. They're members of they're working in a black market economy where maybe they're getting paid cash or maybe they're working under someone else's social security number. And I believe it is our best interest to bring these people forward and identify them as soon as possible, get them paying taxes, get them background checked for both national security and crimes, get them in a system where we know who they are, where they are, and what they're doing.
No benefits.
No, they don't qualify. They wouldn't qualify for any federal benefits of any kind, and not including Obamacare, which is a change in the law.
But aren't they immediately given at least some status? In other words, from the moment this bill would be passed, they would be able to stay in the country legally, but they have to come out of, quote, the shadows, They have to identify themselves. What else? Background checks.
Yeah, so you have to come forward. What you get, by the way, in exchange for all I'm about to describe, all you get is a temporary work permit that has to be renewed. It expires in 6 years. It doesn't last for the rest of your life. So you got to come back and reapply for it. When you come forward, you will be background checked for both national security and criminal purposes. That includes the collection of biometric information like your fingerprint and so forth. You're going to be registered. You're going to have to pay a fine. You're going to have to pay the fee of that application. And then you're going to have to go out and be gainfully employed, because in 6 years when you come back to reapply for that permit, because you can't even apply for a green card for 10 years, if you haven't been gainfully employed and paying taxes, you will not be able to get reauthorized for that permit moving forward.
All right, so in the interim, in that 6-year period, then who is going to verify, ascertain, determine that the border has then been secured?
So the way the plan is now is the Department of Homeland Security has to come up with a border plan and also a fencing plan, 2 separate plans. I actually wanted them separate because there are some that don't like any fencing at all. They want to take the money and use it all for technology. I think fencing is a critical component, not the only solution to the problem, but there are areas of the border where fencing will work. And so they have to come up with these 2 plans.
Why do we trust Janet Napolitano when she says the border's secure?
Well, that's the problem, right? Here's the good news. The good news is she's going to be there at most for 3.5 years. Now, maybe she'll be replaced by somebody worse. Maybe she'll be replaced by somebody better. But the point is that the first trigger in this is 5 years. They got 5 years to substantially complete these 2 plans. 2 of those years will be done by somebody else, not just them. That being said, that's the point. You've hit on the exact point, and that is not just Janet Napolitano. People don't trust that the federal government's going to come up with a good plan for the border, and what they say is make sure this happens right. If we can get that part of the bill right, I think people are willing to support immigration.
And you're thinking that maybe that it wasn't the best idea to put it in Janet Napolitano's hands or the administration's hands. There's another alternative working its way.
Traditionally, that's usually the way it works. I mean, you have law enforcement officials whose job it is to enforce the law. You tell them you must do this. Here's the funding to do it, and you allow them to go out and find the right technologies, the right mix of fence and technology to do the job. What we have found since the bill's been introduced is that the lack of trust in the federal government, by the way, not made any better by the events of the last few days, things that we've learned the federal government has done in other realms, whether it's the IRS or other things.
Yes.
The lack of trust in the federal government, and in particular in this administration, makes it even harder to convince people that coming up with a plan like this on its own is good enough. So maybe the solution is to have Congress actually write that plan for them.
We're going to take a break. We'll come back more with our panel of experts. They'll be asking questions of Senator Rubio as we continue right here on Hannity. And welcome back to Hannity, our special audience of legal experts and political experts, and we're dealing with the issue of immigration, and Senator Marco Rubio is going to take questions now from our audience. Congressman Louis Gohmert, I know the House is going to be key in this bill.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. But Marco is not only a rising star, he is a star, and I think the future of our party, I'm thrilled he's a Republican senator. I think it bodes well for us.
Thank you.
But he hasn't learned the hard way yet that you can't trust this government to do what they say. Even Chertoff would promise us things about border security that did not happen. And then when we think about adding 11 or even more million people to those being investigated, heck, they couldn't even get a good investigation of the Boston bomber when the Russians put it in their lap. So I'm extremely concerned about the 11 million that we're told would be investigated, when actually they'll cripple an already crippled system. So my concern and my question really is, why don't we take care of securing the border? And then I promise you, I guarantee you, we will be able to get a bill very quickly and easily. But as the sheriffs are telling me all along the border,
you want to bifurcate this.
Yes, actually secure it, and then I will do anything to work with you. I know so many others that would, to get the bill to do what you're talking about.
First, thank you for your kind words. I think you raise a very good point, and in fact, that was my position. Let's do the fence first, and then let's worry about. Here's the problem with it, and why I've kind of felt that the other way may be better. the 11 million that are here now illegally, we want to know who they are as soon as possible. We don't want that number to become 12, 13, 14, because we cut this off. We say you had to have been here by December of 2011. You have to be able to prove that you were here by December of 2011. What I don't want is word to get out that once they're done securing the border, then they're going to legalize people, because then you're going to have a rush. So that's part of it. And the other part of it is that at this time, with the deficit and the debt that we face, the money we're actually using to secure the border, the $5.5 billion we're assigning to the border, most of that money is coming from the fees and the fines that these 11 million are have to pay. So part of it is we're actually, now listen, we're not doing it just for that purpose. There has to be a consequence for violating our immigration laws. We are a compassionate people. But at the same time, there has to be consequences for violating the immigration laws of the United States. One of those consequences is a $2,000 fine. And most of that money is assigned directly to these things.
We know that so many are not in the shadows because the IRS, our wonderful IRS, they provided, despite Congress saying you had to have a Social Security number to get the child tax credit, we got people that got tax numbers without Social Security numbers, and they're getting billions of dollars.
And we should fix that.
And we can.
We can fix that with or without immigration reform.
Sheriff, let me go. I was down at the border 6 times, and I was out on helicopter, horseback, which was a joke. I was out on all-terrain vehicles. I was out in boats. 6, 7 locations along the border. The one thing that I learned, and I saw the tunnels from San Diego from Mexico, and I saw the drug warehouses, but whenever I met those guys, you on the front border, and you're in Pinal County, whenever you decided to secure an area of the border, you could do it with 100% efficiency.
Absolutely.
So we can secure all of it.
Yes. Well, Pinal County, we're the #1 pass-through county for drug, human smuggling in the country. We're not even on the border because Interstate 10, 8 that intersect in our county. And last year, Senator, there was 123,000 illegals that were apprehended in the Tucson sector. Yeah. Meanwhile, we have, as you pointed out, there is a breach of trust. Secretary Napolitano, in order to get to this point of immigration reform, she's tried to get everybody to believe that the border's more secure than ever, look the other way so we can get this immigration reform. A year ago, we had the largest drug bust in the history of Arizona. In my county, 76 members of the Sinaloa cartel armed with 108 weapons. These are prohibited possessors. And this is what we call clues, that the border is not more secure than ever. And it brings up to your point and Sean's point earlier, a national security issue. If we have 123,000 basic illegals who want to come here to work, who don't have a lot of means financially, education, but those people from countries of interest that have deliberate plans, possibly military training, and all this concern nationally of possible terrorist threat.
We're going to have to break, and I'm not trying to cut you off, Sheriff. Please forgive me. But I got one question that maybe you can address. What would you like to tell the senator, based on your experience, that would help his bill, that would make it better?
I've just retired 20 years as an Army officer, and I commanded 700 active duty soldiers in Yuma. We achieved 97% reduction in illegal entries and drug and human smuggling in that sector. And we can do it, contrary to what the Secretary says. Your plan does not have implemented, and this is where you need to draft it and require, because it leaves it open to the Secretary, 6,000 armed soldiers for a 2-year period. And the fencing, you must have that, not along 2,000 miles of the border, 700 miles of predetermined area, historical proven paths of smuggling in order in the high trafficked areas in urban centers south and north of the border, have the technology, not just cameras, infrared at night, sensors, lighting, and then most importantly, Senator, the enforcement of the law. We have had disparate enforcement of the law depending on what sector you have. This administration has gutted the law. And we have, and this is why we need to hear more.
We're short on time. Quick answer,
well, he's right, and that's exactly right. And what you said is a multifaceted approach. Fences in some places, guards, border patrol, military, what have you, and others. That's exactly the kind of approach we hope to take. And increasingly, the problem we're having is people don't trust DHS will do that.
Would that be the plan you'd like to do?
And I think you have been involved in the past in drawing up plans,
with
right?
the McCain-Kyle plan.
Right, and maybe that's something we should look at as a benchmark.
All right, we got to take a break. We'll come back more with our studio audience, more with Senator Rubio as we continue on this special edition of Hannity. And welcome back to the special edition of Hannity. The topic, immigration. Our guest, Senator Marco Rubio. Liliana.
First of all, thank you so much for representing the voice of Latinos as we move forward the immigration bill. So I really appreciate it. And as a Latina myself who had to go through the process of a cumbersome immigration, ordeal, I want to know what is the plan with that 40% that you're mentioning that entered the country legally. I came here with a student visa, and it was very hard to turn it into a green card and a path to citizenship. So I could have been an undocumented immigrant if it wasn't because of marriage, which shouldn't be the only way. So I want to know, what is the plan? I hear a lot of border security, which is great, but there is a talent drain potentially with people like me that came here and didn't have a way to stay while I had a job offer from a Fortune 100 company.
Well, we could do a whole program on the modernization, but 2 points directly to your point. The first thing the bill does is it says basically if you have a PhD or a master's in one of the STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and you have you're a graduate of a U.S. school and you have an offer from a U.S. company, you're going to get to stay. I mean, we're not worried about being overrun by PhDs in physics and things like that. We want to encourage that. But you touched on another point, and that is, imagine right now if you're an entrepreneur, a business owner in the United States, you're here on a non-immigrant visa as an investor. You can never turn that into a green card. You literally would have to leave the country, start from scratch. Under this bill, for the first time, we will actually allow people that are in the non-immigrant category who are skill-based to convert to a permanent situation if they want to be. These are the job creators. These are people that own businesses and employ people. These are high-value employees. It's one of the fixes to a broken legal immigration system. But the sheriff touched on something else a moment ago, and that is this. You have a supply of people that are willing to work in the United States for jobs that aren't being filled domestically. You have a demand for those sorts of workers here. Those two things are going to meet. And the question is, are we going to have a reasonable process for them to meet or a chaotic process for them to meet? Right now it's chaotic.
Chad.
Senator, first of all, thank you for all you're doing to help move this issue forward. When I was chief of staff at DHS, we learned kind of the hard way that it is hard to enforce a number of these border provisions. And I agree with the sheriff and the congressman that verification is critical. So in this respect, I think your bill is weaker than what we did under Bush in 07, but it is stronger on the legal immigration side. My question to you, though, is if you look at the 86 amnesty, literally over 60% of those offered amnesty declined it. And so the path to citizenship issue is this. That's been such a difficult problem. Does it make sense to have a path to citizenship, or is it better just to allow someone to have some type of legal status and eventually their children will be U.S. citizens?
Jeb Bush said no to citizenship, and as did Senator Cruz.
So a couple points. Number one is there really isn't a path to citizenship. There's a path to a green card. For 10 years, 10 and a half years, minimum. Some people it'll be longer depending on when they get their temporary status. That's all you can have. That means you can work, pay taxes, and travel. You can't do anything but that for those 10 and a half years. After that, the only thing that happens is you're no longer prohibited from applying for a green card the same way everybody else does. You're not awarded a green card at 10 and a half years. No one comes and says, here's your green card. All that happens is you're no longer prohibited from applying for one. You still have to qualify for it. You still have to get in line and do all those sorts of things to get it. Here's the other point I would make. In the long term and in the long run for this country, I personally do not believe it is a good idea to have 10 or 11 million people that are permanently barred from ever aspiring to citizenship of the country. It's been a disaster in Europe to have people that are forever trapped in that category. We want people to fall in love with America, assimilate into America, embrace what it means to be an American politically, culturally, and all those other things. And citizenship offers that. We don't want to prohibit people from doing that, but if you've broken our immigration laws, you're going to have a long and expensive process as a consequence of having broken the law.
All right, we got to take a break. We will come back, and we're going to try and get as many as we can in. A lot of questions, right? All right, and I have a question about Benghazi and the IRS. We'll continue with Senator Marco Rubio and our panel straight ahead. And welcome back to Hannity, our special audience edition. And, of course, we're joined by Senator Marco Rubio. The issue is the immigration bill. Michelle Fields, good to see you.
So the latest attack on your bill has to do with the cost, right? The objection is not so much with immigration, but with the entitlement state. More people in this country means more people using state services. That's costly. That's a valid concern. Have you thought of putting in some sort of meaningful entitlement reform into the immigration bill too?
Well, I wish we could. If we could do meaningful entitlement reform, I'd be working on that right now. Unfortunately, these guys don't want to do it. This bill actually has a 10-and-a-half-year period before people can even get a green card, where they still don't qualify for Medicare. Medicare goes bankrupt in 9 years. So that just tells you the kind of emergency we're facing with regards to that. Here's what I would say to you about the cost. If you are an illegal immigrant in the United States and you get this temporary status, for 10.5 years or more, you don't qualify, actually for more, because even the first 5 years of a green card, you don't qualify for any federal benefits, food stamps, Social Security. Well, eventually, the point is, eventually the whole system is bankrupt, not just because of them, but because of the way it's currently designed. That needs to be dealt with. But I would say this to you. You are now going to have people paying taxes that aren't paying now. Medicare, Social Security, FICA taxes, hopefully improving their quality of life, paying more in income tax as well. In fact, they won't be able to get a green card if they can't prove they can sustain themselves and have been paying taxes.
Carlos, good to see you.
Senator, good to see you.
Good to see you.
In 2010, I visited the border with Senators Kyle, Barrasso, and Lemieux, and a lot had been done to improve, and I think we still need to do a lot more. But I agree with you that it can't be the only thing. I'll give you an example. In our hometown, Miami-Dade County, we spend at our school system over $20 million every year as a direct result of this broken immigration system. The federal government doesn't reimburse us despite the fact that it's their fault. And why? Because, like you said, a lot of people are overstaying their visas, and in some cases the government lets families with children in the middle of the school year, which imposes a burden on schools. So it can't just be the border. We all support border security, but it has to be a lot more.
Absolutely, and that's why the entry-exit system is so important. So we know when people come in, but we also know whether they left or not in real time.
All right, Mario. Hi.
Good to see you again, Senator. Part of the fuzzy math in this analysis of your bill by certain sectors and certain think tanks has dealt with assumptions, assuming that all 11 million people are going to get citizenship, that all 11 million people are Hispanic, that they're all poor and they're going to stay poor for the rest of their lives. Their children are going to be poor. Their grandchildren are going to be poor. Can you talk a little bit about that and the confidence you have in the American dream and the capitalistic
Let me just say, I have tremendous confidence in the American dream, and I believe the immigrant experience in the U.S. is one of upward mobility. Quite frankly, if that's not who we are anymore as a country, we've lost the essence of what our nation should be about, and that's what we should be fighting for, is to keep it that kind of country, which I believe it still is, despite the best efforts of this administration to undo that. Let me just say this about the point you've made. Not only for 10.5 years, these folks will not qualify for any federal benefits. So not only do they have to be able to survive in the country for 10.5 years without any federal benefits, in order for them to even be renewed on their temporary status, they have to prove that they've been gainfully employed, paying taxes, making a certain amount of money a year so they can sustain themselves and their families. If they can't prove that, they can't even be reauthorized at the 6-year point.
Amy Kramer, Tea Party.
Good to see you, Senator. Thanks for having me here, Sean. I'm not an expert. I'm here representing the grassroots. And first, I want to commend you for getting out front on this issue, because for once, the Republicans have control of the narrative to an extent, and we're not letting the Democrats, go through the process and come up with this legislation behind closed doors and then shove it down our throats like Obamacare. Now, we don't trust the federal government, as we can see with the IRS earlier this week, or last week, all that's come out. The biggest issue is border security. We have laws that are not being enforced, as you said, and this administration has no concern for the rule of law. And at the end of the day, elections are everything, and I believe that they use the IRS to suppress the opposition in an election year. How do we know that they're not going to find a way to get this through and shove it down our throats so that they again can, lead on it and win an election? And you have people in the Gang of Eight that are voting against border security in the Judiciary Committee.
Let me add one thing. Maybe you can answer Amy's question through the prism of the IRS issue.
Absolutely.
With conservative groups. But
and I think that's what people just don't have trust that the federal government will do its job, and quite frankly now increasingly have worries that the federal government under this administration has political motives for the way it does its job. Let me just say this. I've said this to everybody so that I believe the vast majority of Americans, including the majority of conservative Republicans, are prepared to support immigration reform if we can ensure that we never have another wave of illegal immigration again, to which the border issue is important. So it's very simple. If we can come up with a plan that people have confidence in for the border, I believe we'll have immigration reform. If we cannot, we will not, and we should not. I don't think it'll pass. I don't think it will pass without those measures in there. I just don't.
We've got to take a break. We'll come back, and we will ask the Senator about Benghazi as this special edition of Hannity continues. Glad you're with us. And as we continue the special edition of Hannity with Senator Marco Rubio, Roy.
Hi, Senator. I just wanted to thank you. As a young conservative, it's good to see a Republican leading on this issue. So thank you very much for your leadership.
Thank you. It's been fun on some days.
Not on others?
Not on others.
Mercedes, good to see you.
Obviously, for Hispanic conservatives, we're concerned about, what does this mean, the political implications in regards to, a political story that came out saying that these 11 million or so would lean more to the Democratic Party. As we've seen, 50% of Hispanics right now are leaning more Democratic. And so, as Republicans, we try very hard to get bypast this issue. Now, I know, for instance, that talking to, Hispanic individuals and saying, what do you think? And they're like, well, unless we get through this immigration issue, you can't compete for our vote. And I agree with that. What's your feeling about that? I believe the
immigration issue is a gateway issue in the Hispanic community, but we shouldn't do this for the politics of it. This should not be about this. I see something that's hurting the United States of America, a country that I owe basically everything to other than God and my family. And my family owes everything to this country. And I see something that's hurting it bad, and I just want to fix it. The only way I know how to fix it is to get involved in trying to fix it. And that's why I'm doing it. Although I think there are political implications, I don't agree with that political article. I think the Republican Party and the conservative movement can do very well among Hispanics. That's not the reason why we should be doing this. We should be doing this because it's what we have now is bad for America.
Jason.
You mentioned supply and demand earlier, and that's what I see as the core of this problem. We have too many immigrants chasing too few visas. And so I see an attempt to separate, however, the handing out of visas or a guest worker program from the security aspects. And I'm wondering to what extent we put in place a guest worker program, we reduce pressure on the border. I mean, most of these people are coming here to work, and the Homeland Security people I've spoken to say, we don't want to spend a lot of time chasing down people coming here to work. We'd rather focus on those drug dealers and human smugglers. To what extent can a guest worker program help alleviate pressure on the border?
I think it's a significant measure in that regard, along with all the other things. This is multi-layered. But if we create a cost-effective legal way for people to come here temporarily, return to their home country, and come again in the future, even when they're needed, I think it would reduce illegal immigration significantly.
Jennifer, hi.
Hi, thanks, Sean. Thank you, Senator Rubio, for being there. And otherwise, I think it would be a completely liberal bill, and it would be all President Obama's. So to us, immigration reform is a conservative issue. And so it touches national security, the economy. And so I want you to talk about or address how this is a conservative issue and why conservatives should be behind it.
Because at its core, conservatism has always been about solving problems. It's been about taking our time-tested principles and applying them to the issues of the day. This is a major issue of the day. Now, there are other issues that are probably bigger and more threatening, the national debt, the fact that our economy isn't growing. But this one was going to come up. We need to have a solution for this one. And conservatism has always been about solving problems.
Charles.
Real quick. First of all, my wife, who's Puerto Rican, loves you, and she would be upset if I didn't mention that. Secondly, as each day goes on, more and more of your colleagues are saying this is amnesty. This is sort of the 800, no one's mentioned that yet. What do you say to people who say this is a pure, flat-out amnesty program?
Well, bottom line is that amnesty is the forgiveness of something. There are significant consequences for being illegally in this country under this bill. A $2,000 fine, a 10.5-year wait, an application fee, a background check, a national security background check. I mean, anything, you're not going to round up and deport 11 million people. So if anything short of rounding up and deporting 11 million people is amnesty, then that's somebody else's definition.
Thank you, Sean. Every attempt at reform in the past has tried and failed to anticipate the future by establishing very rigid quotas that were overtaken by reality.
Yeah.
Are you ready to have a system that's more flexible and open so that you don't have a situation in which in times of bonanza the demand for work is much higher than the quotas?
Right. So the balance is we want to protect American workers by requiring that the jobs be offered first to them, but we do have safety valve provisions in the bill that allow quotas to increase if in fact there's this dramatic need in the economy.
Rose Tennant.
Okay, I understand there are dozens of amendments that related specifically to border enforcement. They were quite robust, but they were decided to be non-germane for the Judiciary Committee. Can that be revisited later on?
Yes. I don't know I don't know all those amendments. I know one that was passed was Senator Grassley's that now requires the entire border to be secured, not just the high-risk sectors. But there'll be others that will be reintroduced. As I said, unless we get people's confidence that we are going to secure the border, this bill won't pass. It won't become law. And I'm not interested in sponsoring a bill. I'm interested in passing a law that helps our country.
Terry Pickett, a.k.a. Lois Lane.
Senator Rubio, there's already a lawsuit out there hitting 2 counties out in Mississippi saying that there are more active voters than there are actual eligible voters out there. How is it that with new people, millions of people who aren't actually legal here in this country, how are you going to really handle the amount of voter fraud that is potential in that?
Because they will now be identified. They're doing it I suspect that the way that could happen is the way people get jobs now. They show someone else's ID or social security number, and under that identification, they're getting access to jobs and even benefits. But under this bill, every single person that comes forward who was previously illegally will now be identified. We will know who they are. In fact, if you're illegally here, you'll have an identification card assigned to you. So we think that's one of the reasons why this is so important to bring those 11 million people
Mike,
out.
we're going to get you in. Go ahead.
Senator, thank you, and to your colleagues for actually raising and creating a merit-based system. I teach immigration law in the law school. I'm a second-generation immigration lawyer, and all day long we're telling people that you have to either get a visa based on employment, based on family, or based on an investment. And we pale in contrast to other countries. It's more of a comment to make sure that the focus isn't only on those borders, but this wonderful diamond in the rough that we have a huge legacy of immigration that we can't afford not to have some kind of reform here. I urge you and your colleagues.
Last quick answer.
I agree. And the most important part of this bill, quite frankly, in terms of our economy, is the modernization of our legal immigration system so that it's pro-American economy and good for us in the future, especially.
You know, we could have done easily 3 hours with this audience. Senator, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank all of you. And as always, thank you at home for being with us. And let not your heart be troubled. The news continues, and we will see you soon on Hannity. Thanks for being with us.